I was reading or participated in an interesting topic on a Facebook post earlier this week. And basically, the story was that, in short, a group of players and their characters decided to take on an ogre encounter, and the characters were level 2. And it turned out that they didn't have any plan A or B and didn't make any contingencies to do anything extra. And to make a long story short, there were actually 2 ogres that showed up, and they killed over half of the party. So at least 4 of the players got up, were pretty upset, and told the GM that they would never play in his game again. So there was a big discussion about this. Some of the responses were pretty interesting. There was a lot of things like saying that the players were basically entitled, thinking that nowadays they deserve to win just because they're supposedly the main characters of the story. And in their own heads, the heroes never die in the movies, so why should basically they die in the RPG session? Another response was that certain GMs have a soft style, whatever that means. And basically, they just say yes to the players, letting the players do whatever they want and spoiling them rotten. And that GM in particular said that they enjoy chewing up the players and picking his teeth with their bones. And this is all basically good experiences for the players because it teaches them to fear for their lives and to make better choices in the game. Another person said that they kind of get annoyed when the GM goes out of their way not to kill a character when it makes sense. And they consider that to be fudging. Another person said that they don't want any of these whiny people in their games who think that because they're the hero, they deserve the loot. And all they want to do is play with the GM whose monsters lie down belly up, and wait for the players to slaughter them. A couple of people said that it was a situation where the GM should have explained the lethality of the game to the players. A couple of people said that they tend to run more lethal games, and that the players maybe had been used to playing in less lethal games before. So that, it comes down to communication. And I agree with the whole communication thing, but it's kind of the whole player entitlement argument that I really don't understand. The way I look at it is that players and the GM alike are all there basically to entertain one another, and that's entertain one another. The players aren't there just to have the GM cater and entertain them. And it goes both ways. Everybody's supposed to be working together to have a good time and to tell a story. I don't care what anybody says. You're there basically telling a story during that session. Telling a story isn't a bad thing. Telling a story isn't something that's only done by indie gamers or GMs or indie games, or anything like that. I don't care if you're an OSR player or Fate player or Pathfinder player or whatever. Basically, what you guys are doing is when you're sitting there together, you're telling a story. Now, that being said, I don't think that having other viable options other than killing or slaughtering a group is a bad thing. I don't think that it's a soft style to be able to come up with options other than player character death. Now, I'm not saying that when your players don't make wise decisions that they shouldn't suffer the consequences for that. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that there have to be other consequences besides death. You know, everybody that's listening to my voice here, obviously, we've made mistakes in life, and all of those mistakes weren't fatal. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. Now, if you haven't learned from any of those mistakes, you know, that would be saying that the only time you can ever learn from something is if it's fatal, which is not true. So, for example, the example I gave, I said, well, okay, maybe one of the player characters could have or would have gotten killed or beaten unconscious, or maybe more than one. But why not have the ogres capture the rest of the party, gussy them up, tie them up, and save them for dinner later? Or perhaps use them as a bargaining chip for gold or cattle, or even to allow the ogres to maybe move from one point to another. You know, why does it have to be death? You can't tell me that having a character tied upside down, dangling over a boiling pot, getting prepared for dinner, or being turned over and over on a spit isn't something that they're gonna forget. That's something that's gonna stick with them. You know? So I just think that there have to be other options. Death is kind of an easy option to me. That's an easy out. You know, anybody can say, okay, well, you take 38 points of damage and you die. Roll up a new character. You know, I think it takes a lot more experience and creativity to come up with something else that's just as interesting or more interesting than just death. And I don't think that it's player entitlement for a GM to come up with these options. I think it's just creativity. You know, that does come with experience. That's true. But the problem is that for some reason, people are saying that or acting as though what all other games and GMs and players, the norm is player character death is the norm. You know, the fact that these ogres wiped most of the party and killed most of the party, that's the norm. That's what should happen. That's what teaches players to be more careful and to play their characters better or safer or whatever you want to call it. You know, even if the players ran away, that's fine. There's no problem with that. But like I said, there's other more interesting ways to do it. You know, why does death have to be the norm? Why does that have to be the default outcome? You know, and even if the players are considered to be heroes in a game, which I don't think is a bad thing, there have been plenty of stories that we've all read of heroes having tragedy in their lives. You know, sometimes there are worse things than death. You know, and I honestly would have considered, if I was GMing that episode, that if the players were getting the crap pounded out of them that badly, that I would have said, hey, you guys have the option of throwing your weapons down and surrendering. And if the players didn't want to do it, that's fine. That's their choice. Even though I think that that's also I'll say phony. It's a phony way out, because most of us would gladly take any other option besides death if there's a slight chance that we're going to survive at a later time. You know, every player character isn't a fanatic, berserk, you know, crazy. You know, most of us, realistically, you know, even in the realm of a fantasy world, would take that slight chance of being able to survive till another day, we'd take it, as opposed to just running into the path of an ogre's club and saying, "Oh, I want my character to die." You know, that I know that that's considered to be taking away player agency and a bunch of other things, but that's another thing that really doesn't make sense to me. You know, it's always as if the player seems as though they have the option to do even the most illogical things just because it's that character. So if I decide to run into the path of that ogre's foot and get my head stomped in, that's okay. But if I say that, wow, you know, can I surrender and possibly live to see another day? Then what if the GM decides to kill me anyway? I don't know. It just seems like it uh, continues kind of like a bad perspective or bad habits in gaming. I just think that as GMs, even though we are there, you know, even though I think it's everyone's responsibility to have a good time at the table and to support each other, I still think that as the GM, you just have to, if you take that responsibility of GM, then it's also your responsibility to try to be as creative as you can and to basically tell the best story possible. Thanks.